Hello everyone and welcome to the History Quiz with me, Joshua Daniels. This is the History Quiz for the month of September in the year 2024. Now for those of you who are new here, this is a series of monthly quizzes I'm doing throughout 2024, all as you can guess, based around history. So some simple rules here. First things first, no conferring. You can play as teams if you want, or you can play on your own, but there is no discussion or cheating between teams and players. Number 2, no using search engines or internet to find out the answers. Number 3, there's one answer per question, 1 point per correct answer. So you only can put one answer per question, and I will only accept the point if there's only the correct answer. If you put an incorrect answer in there, I won't accept it. And finally, number 4, there are 5 categories, 30 questions with 15 seconds to answer each one. You do not need to answer all questions, but will not get a point for questions left unanswered. So you don't need to put any answer in. If you leave it blank, you won't be penalised, but you won't receive a point for it. So, without further ado, let's move on to our first category, which is famous faces. So famous faces, very straightforward. I will show 10 pictures of famous historical figures, and all you have to do is write down which historical figure you think it is. So there'll be 10 of them, 15 seconds per famous face. So without further ado, let's move on to the first famous face. Number 1, who is this? Number 2, who is this? Number 3, who is this? Number 4, who is this? Number 5, who is this? Number 6, who is this? Number 7, who is this? Number 8, who is this? Ultimate face, number 9, who is this? And final face, number 10, who is this? And that is the end of the famous faces category. Moving on to the second category now, events and dates. So events and dates is a little bit different. You'll have a minute to answer this. There will be 5 points available, and what you'll see on the next thing, on what you'll see coming up next, is on the left will be 5 events, historical events labelled 1 to 5, and on the right you will see 5 dates labelled A to E. All you have to do is match up the event with its correct date to get the point. The minutes will start as soon as I finish reading out all of the events and dates. So let's move on to category number 2, events and dates. Event number 1, Robert the Bruce dies. Number 2, Henry VIII dies. Number 3, the Dunkirk evacuation. Number 4, Battle of Gettysburg. And number 5, Emperor Hadrian dies. And the dates: A, 1863, B, 138, C, 1547, D, 1940, and E, 1329. Your minute starts now. Halfway through. "15 seconds left." And that marks the end of category number 2, events and dates. Moving on to our third category now, true or false. So this is 5 questions, each question worth 1 point, and I will show you a historical statement. You just have to write down whether you think it's true or false, and if you get it right, you get a point. As always, 15 seconds per question. So let's move on to question 1 of 5 of the third category. Number 1, true or false? The French horn was actually created in Germany in 1814. Two, true or false? The Chernobyl disaster was caused when a rat fell into the reactor. Number 3, Harry Houdini died by asphyxiation after he failed to get out of a noose. Number 4, penultimate question. True or false? When it was first broadcast on the radio, War of the Worlds created mass hysteria, especially in the USA. And final question, number 5, true or false? Tomato ketchup was used as a medicine in the early 1800s. And that marks the end of the third category, moving on to our fourth and penultimate category, which came first. So there's 5 questions here, and what I'm going to do is show you 5 questions which show 2 historical events. You just have to write down which one you think came first. So 15 seconds per question as always. Let's move on to the first question. Number 1, which came first, the birth of Lenin or the birth of Stalin? Number 2, which came first, the invention of the bicycle or the invention of the unicycle? Number 3 even. Which came first, Christopher Columbus crossing the Atlantic or Washington crossing the Delaware? Ultimate question number 4. Which came first, the Battle of the Somme or the Battle of the Nile? And finally, number 5. Which came first, the death of Abraham Lincoln or the death of Alexander Hamilton? And that marks the end of the 4th category. Moving on to our 5th and final category, general history knowledge. Said this will be 5 questions, 15 seconds per question as always, and these will just be around general history. So there'll be a question and all you have to do is write down what you think is the correct answer. In order to get the point, it has to be pretty much exactly, unless I otherwise say so, what the answer to the question is. So without further ado, let's move on to our first question. Number 1. What is estimated to be the deadliest battle in history? Number 2. Who was the last Tudor monarch? Number 3. Which British rigid airship crashed in 1930? Number 4, penultimate question. How many British Prime Ministers have been assassinated? And moving on to the final question of the quiz this month, number 5. Which intergovernmental military alliance was formed in 1949? And that brings us to the end of the quiz for September 2024. Hope you've all enjoyed. Now, if you're all ready to carry on and move on to the answers now, we'll go back to the beginning, to the 3rd category, which was famous faces. This was worth 10 points, this category, 1 point per correct famous face. Number 1 was Che Guevara. Number 2 was Josephine Baker. Number 3 was Sigmund Freud. Number 4 was Fidel Castro. Number 5 was Mary Wollstonecraft. Number 6 was Charles Dickens. Number 7 was Babe Ruth. Number 8 was Nikola Tesla. Number 9 was Jimmy Smith. And number 10 was Anne Hathaway. Of course, not the famous actress nowadays, Anne Hathaway. It was, of course, Shakespeare's wife. However, I won't accept Shakespeare's wife. That was her marital status. It has to be her name, Anne Hathaway. Moving on to events and dates, category number 2. So, number 1, Robert the Bruce dies. He was E 1329, so 1 was E. Number 2, Henry VIII dies, or C 1547, so 2 was C. Number 3, Dunkirk evacuation was D 1940, so 3 was D. Number 4, Battle of Gettysburg was A 1863, so 4 was A. And number 5, Emperor Hadrian dies was B 138, so 5 was B. Moving on to the 3rd category now, true or false. Number 1, true or false. The French horn was created in Germany in 1814. That is true. Number 2, the Chernobyl disaster was caused when a rat fell into the reactor. That is false. It went out of control during a low power test. Number 3, Harry Houdini died by asphyxiation after he failed to get out of a noose. False. It was appendicitis. Number 4, when it was first broadcast on the radio, War of the Worlds created mass hysteria, especially in the USA. That's false. It's actually a well-speculated and well-circulated myth. It actually didn't create mass hysteria. And number 5, tomato ketchup was used as a medicine in the early 1800s. That is true. Moving on then to the penultimate category, that was which came first. So, which came first, the birth of Lenin or the birth of Stalin? It was Lenin. Lenin was 1870, Stalin was 1878. Number 2, which came first, the invention of the bicycle or the invention of the unicycle? It was the bicycle. Bicycle was 1817, the unicycle was 1879. Number 3, Christopher Columbus crossing the Atlantic or Washington crossing the Delaware? It was Christopher Columbus crossing the Atlantic. That was in 1492. Washington crossing the Delaware was in 1776. Number 4, which came first, Battle of the Somme or Battle of the Nile? It was Battle of the Nile. Battle of the Nile was 1798 and Battle of the Somme was 1916. And finally, number 5, which came first, death of Abraham Lincoln or death of Alexander Hamilton? It was death of Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton was 1804 and Abraham Lincoln was 1865. And finally, moving on to the final category, general history knowledge. Question number 1, what is estimated to be the deadliest battle in history? That is the Battle of Stalingrad. Number 2, who was the last Tudor monarch? That was Queen Elizabeth I. Number 3, which British rigid airship crashed in 1930? It was the R101. Number 4, how many British prime ministers have been assassinated? It was 1, Spencer Perceval. And number 5, which intergovernmental military alliance was formed in 1949? It was NATO. I will accept NATO. I will also accept its full title, which is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And that brings us to the end of the quiz for September 2024. Thanks very much for playing. Hope you enjoyed. Please let me know in the comments below what your scores were if you did play along. And as always, I hope to see you again next month.